He had a lot of other problems with Catholic doctrine too. Like he was not really into the idea that the bread and the wine turns into the blood and flesh of Jesus. He had a problem with that. He also questioned Mary's virginity, which was probably a really bad thing at that time too. So
Joseph is like, you and me both, man. You and me both. Well, Kelley, thank you so much for joining me for Growing Up Fundie. I've been waiting to have you on an episode for, like, I don't know, probably a year now at this point. I think we talked about it ages ago, and then it just kind of dropped off the map. And now you're here, and I'm really excited to have you. So for anybody listening, we know each other through the Atheist Community of Austin, the ACA, where you are officially a host for Truth Wanted and for their show Nonprofits.
Mhm.
But you're also the backup host for AXP, for Atheist Experience, and for Talk Heathen. And I'm one of the hosts for Talk Heathen, and so we've hosted the show together before.
One of the best episodes ever.
Well, and I was just telling you before we were on the record, that's the first time that the majority of the internet agreed with me on something. You know, I had a great time, and I felt like you had a great time, but it's rare that the internet is also like, wow, these two people are good together, and this was a fun show. But enough from me. Tell us about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? What are you about?
I don't even know where to start. I started out as a Christian back when I was a kid. I pretty much had given that up by the age of 14.
And what flavor of Christian were you? What denomination?
I was Lutheran.
Lutheran. Okay.
I was raised a Lutheran, yeah.
And so what made you decide as a 14-year-old that you didn't want to be religious anymore, but that you later backtracked and fell back into?
Well, there was a couple of things. Number one, my stepfather was the one who pretty much made us go to church, and he and my mother got divorced. So there was nobody pushing me to go to church anymore. And that really helped a lot. And then I was already started questioning things for a couple of reasons. Number one, reading Greek and Norse mythology made me wonder, well, what happened to these gods? And
wow. Then, as a 14-year-old, that's intense. That's cool.
And then I was looking up historical events that happened on my birthday, and one of them was that Giordano Bruno had been burned at the stake, and I had no idea who he was, so I went and I looked him up, and reading about him also got me questioning things. So that's kind of like how I got started.
And for anybody who's unfamiliar with who that is, how would you describe him in your own words?
Giordano Bruno, he was an Italian monk during the Renaissance. He was he right away accepted Copernicus's ideas of the sun being the center of the solar system, and then he wrote it down as having had a dream. So I don't know if he had a dream or if he just thought it up, but he wrote it down as I had this dream. And he thought that if the sun is in the center of our solar system, that maybe when we look up into the sky and we see all those other stars, that maybe those are suns that are really far away from us, and maybe they have their own solar systems, and there might be other worlds out there besides our own and other intelligent people. So he was kind of like the first one to come up with that idea. He had a lot of other problems with Catholic doctrine too. Like he was not really into the idea that the bread and the wine turns into the blood and flesh of Jesus. He had a problem with that. He also questioned Mary's virginity, which was probably a really bad thing at that time too. So
Joseph is like, you and me both, man. You and me both. And so that just really stuck with you and made you question things. Did that cause any kind of rift with you and your family? Did you keep it to yourself? What was that like?
No, my thing, like, because we stopped going, I was with my mother. She was raised Catholic, but she really was not very religious. And interestingly enough, when I first started doing this about 4 years ago, I went to her to let her know that I was doing this so she didn't just find out by accident and be pissed off at me.
Yeah.
So, we ended up having a really long talk, and she admitted to me then that she was an agnostic atheist. So, which I know really threw me for a loop, but yeah.
Wow. How long had she been keeping that secret?
Probably quite some time. I honestly didn't ask her how long she felt that way, but I have a feeling that just by the way she talked and the way she acted, it had probably been at least 20 years. So,
Wow.
yeah.
That's wild. And do you have siblings or anything? Or are you an only child?
I am not an only child. I come from a really big family. One of my younger brother is a big fan of the ACA shows, as a
Well,
matter of
that's
fact.
good.
So, yeah,
That's
yeah.
cool.
But I
Yeah.
don't have any. I only have one sister that's fairly religious, and the other ones aren't at all. So it's not. It hasn't caused any problems with me and my family. So
That's good.
sometimes it's hard for me to relate to people who call up and are having problems with family. But
Yeah.
I've had problems with. I mean, haven't we all had problems with family in some way or another?
Haven't we, especially in the
Yeah,
last couple weeks, haven't we all
yeah.
in the UN, at least in the United States?
Yeah,
Um,
you don't get to be my age without not only having the problems, but figuring out ways to deal with them
right.
too.
Like
So
it's not family if you're not having drama at some point. That's just
right.
not your real family if that's not what's going on. And so then what was it later in life when you joined the military that backtracked for you, that kind of made you go back? Because it's rare that you meet people that go back once they've kind of admitted to themselves that they're agnostic or atheist.
Right. I guess, maybe I wasn't completely convinced yet, but when I went into the army, I'm an avid reader. I love to read. And you can't really bring anything with you when you go into basic training, but before you go, they give you a Bible to take with you. So here
Mm.
I was, and I had, when I was younger, I actually had a hard time falling asleep without reading first before I went to sleep. And so I started reading the Bible that they gave me because it was the only book I had to read, which made me have that bit of a relapse. So, but
Wow.
as soon as I got out of the military, I got better again. So
Was it a particular verse or a scripture that you read that made you reconsider, or was it just easy to kind of fall back into it and
I,
do what everyone else was doing?
yeah, it was. And then, too, when you're in basic training, if you can get a break, you welcome any kind of break you can get. And Sundays you could go to church, and even the minister in the church even said, I don't care if you come here just to sleep, but come. So I was, he doesn't care if I come to sleep, so I'm going and taking a nap.
That's funny. So it wasn't even like a refound devotion. You were just like, oh, I guess I'm a Christian now. I'm gonna go take a
Yeah,
nap.
it was,
That's
yeah,
hilarious. And so how long were you in the military for? Did you say 4 years?
not three.
3 years.
Three.
Wow. What did you do while you're in the military? This is very
I
interesting.
well, I wanted something I could get a job at when I got out, so I studied to be a cannon mechanic, so I can fix your
Wow.
cannon.
I've been looking for someone. You can't find a good Canon mechanic anymore. Um, one of the reasons I was so eager to have you on the show is because I feel like I know a lot about you post ACA, but I really don't know much about you before then. And so I feel like I'm just getting all the tea today. I'm just getting all the gossip and the backstory. So
I'm
then,
I'm usually real open about an open book about my life. I mean, if you want to know anything about it, I had a really hard time the first half of my adult life. I was physically abused as a child, so I had really
oh
bad PTSD. So
yeah.
I was like drug addicted, alcoholic.
Wow.
I was homeless for a lot of the time, and
Really?
yeah. So, but I finally got my shit together, and
How?
uh, interestingly enough, I had a child.
Really? And that's kind of what snapped you
Yeah,
out of
and
it?
it just occurred to me, if I don't get my shit together, he might be in the same situation that I was in as a child with the stepfather. So I've got to be there for him so that he doesn't end up in that situation. So, yeah,
Wow.
so that's why I got my shit together, because I wanted to be there for my kids. So
Wow. And
then I hit
so
another one a couple of years later.
and what was it that made you segue from being a non-religious person to being an outspoken and internet atheist, for lack of a
Well,
better term?
it started because what I ended up getting wrapped up in really heavily. I looked at a bunch of different other religions. I studied Buddhism. I looked at Hinduism. I looked at Zen. I was really got into Zen for a while, and I got really, really caught up in woo. With the crystals, I got all caught up in the whole idea that crystals had this amazing power and stuff. And I probably believed in that just as long and more deeply than I ever believed in Christianity. So it was
Wow.
like being able to get myself out of that, and being able to see that, you know, you can have this bad thinking and you can actually pull yourself out of it. And then I wanted to help other people pull themselves out of it as well. You know,
Yeah.
I really think that like New Age ideas are just as threatening today as Christianity is. Maybe not on a political level, but on a social level. And if it keeps on track, it may be a bigger problem than we think it is. So
Yeah, yeah, and it's very interesting that you say that because I've talked to guests in the past about how when you escape one high control group or cult or religion, you think I'm never going to fall for one of those again. I'm immune. I'll see it coming from a mile away. When in reality, you're actually much more likely to fall into another one. It might be a totally different flavor. It might be a totally different kind. Maybe it's CrossFit. Maybe it's something else that you wouldn't even think, you know, like in your situation, it's the spirituality or the power of stones and gems. And then the next thing you know, you're part of another belief system that just isn't healthy for you for whatever reason. And what was it about the power of gems and stones that you eventually left behind or found toxic?
trying to actually use them for what they were supposed to do and not having any
Oh,
success with it, you know,
oh, so
because I
like,
do have a scientific mind. I started going back to school to learn geology. I had gotten a degree in English because I wanted something to fall back on in case I couldn't make it as a short order cook. So I studied
so you were
so I
using
studied
them.
English,
Yeah. So
and
you
then
were using them for like medicine, like you were using them instead of like going to the doctor and stuff like that.
yeah, I mean, I was telling people, yeah, this will help you out. And then what? So then I'm giving them to my friends to help them with their problems, and it's not doing anything for them, obviously. So now I'm starting to question it. I'm taking classes now for geology. I'm learning more about the science behind the rocks, and eventually I just realized it was all bullshit and gave it up. So
And was that hard? Was that sad for you? Or was it more of a whoops?
um no, I don't think so, because I think, you know, I'd already gotten myself out of one indoctrination, right?
Right.
I always say I was indoctrinated by other people the first time, but I did it to myself the second time. So, yeah, you know, I'd already had experience coming out of something like that. And I think having done it to myself made it easier for me to get out of it myself as
Right.
well.
Interesting. So religious people may be watching this and going, well, how do you know that atheism isn't the third indoctrination for you? How do you know that that's where you belong or that's what's good for you or that's what's true? What would you say to that?
That's a good question, and
I
I
think it's a great
don't.
question.
And I honestly I don't. It feels good to me. It feels right. When I look at things on a logical level, this seems to be a good place to be. I've never been happier in my life than I am right now, so I think that, says a lot. But I was having a conversation with another one of the ACA hosts, and I was talking about how some Siberian tribes and some Mexican tribes, the shamans of the tribes, will have to purify the magic mushrooms that the whole tribe eats, and they do that by eating them themselves. And then the tribe drinks their urine, because that's how you express it through your body. You can look this up. This is real stuff.
No, I believe this
So
100%.
I'm always worried that I'm getting people to drink my metaphorical piss.
I was gonna say if you're about to ask me to drink your pee, I don't know if I can do that, Kelley. I'm sorry about that. I just don't know. I don't know. I draw the line. Well, and I like to tell people, sure, one day we may discover that atheism is a big fat lie. It's just one more cult. The only difference is like you said, I've never felt happier. I've never felt like it made more sense. There is scientific evidence to back up what I've learned through atheism, where I still have yet to see any evidence whatsoever to back up anything I was ever told was real in church. I've never been sexually shamed. I've never been oppressed either by the government or by any other powers that be through the lens of atheism. You know, nobody's ever said I'm doing this to you because of atheism. So it's the least toxic cult I've ever been a part of, and it's inexpensive. And you know, you get interesting reads. I've met a lot of nice people, but I've just been curious what your answer to that would be. Um, and so, has there ever been a time in your life since any of that has happened where you've ever questioned whether or not you are on the right path for yourself? Or do you ever have moments where you're like, oh no, what if the rapture is real, or anything like that where
Every
you
day,
question? Yeah.
every day. Every day. And I think it's when you stop questioning yourself, that's when you get into trouble, right?
Yes.
And that's part of having an open mind. It's not believing in alternative facts. Anybody can do that. That's just following a shepherd with a smaller flock, right?
And then
It's
you become
being able to
president of the
take,
United States.
yeah, it's being able to take what you already believe and re-examining it from a different perspective, and maybe saying, hey, what I believed in may be bullshit here. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's important to do that. And yeah, I do that I question myself constantly.
Yeah. And I'm glad you said that. I loved what you said about how when you stop questioning yourself, that's when you get into trouble. When you stop being curious and wondering and searching for facts and making sure that what you believe is still upheld by science or reality. And so if somebody were watching this and they're like, man, Kelley's story sounds a lot like mine. I would love to be where Kelley is right now in his journey. What advice would you get for them? Like, what would you say to them?
Oh boy, that's tough. Because we're all on our own journey. So what worked for me might not work for you. Like I said, a lot of it was having come to the realization that I couldn't make another human being suffer the way I did potentially, which made me get my shit together in a big, big way. I think another thing that's really important is to believe in yourself. We human beings are incredibly resilient. They're incredibly intelligent, and you're a human being. You can do what you want to do. I like to point out, like, my son and I created this business. Mostly I did, but my son and I run this business now. And I started out living on the street, and then got this.
Wow.
So if a drug addicted alcoholic living homeless on the street can end up like this 20 years later,
Yeah.
pretty much anybody can do it.
Yeah. And what was that? I mean, I know this is probably a 10-hour conversation, but what is that like? Do you feel like one day you just wake up and you're homeless on the street? Are you surprised? Is it like, what are the thoughts that go through your head when you're living on the street?
In my case, yeah, that's a really good question. That is like a 10-hour
Yeah, that could
conversation.
be like a whole podcast in
Yeah.
itself, just a whole
I
series.
I was lucky because I was still making money while I was on the street.
Oh,
The statute of limitations are over now, but I was selling drugs, so I was making money illegally. So I was eating. Every once in a while, I could get myself a hotel room, get a shower. I was able to keep friends. So
wow.
I had things to fall back on while I was living on the street. I just didn't have my own place to go to.
Yeah.
And I would, like, every one of my sisters, I kept a toothbrush at their house.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
wherever I woke up at, I'd have a toothbrush there.
Wow. And how long did you live like that?
Gee, I lived on the streets on and off for probably 15 years.
Wow.
And a large part of that time, though, like, my ex-wife and I traveled around the country in an RV for
Yeah.
about 5 years, doing what I'm doing now, rock collecting, making jewelry, going to art festivals, um, um, music festivals, art fairs, that kind of a thing. So that was like 5 years of voluntarily living that way and actually making a good living doing it. So
Interesting. And
yeah,
what made you give up that lifestyle?
her and I got divorced, for one, and for two, it's not easy. It's not an easy way
No.
to live, and it does. I mean, I did it for 5 years. It does get old after a while. So
Yeah.
I don't
I
even
would imagine.
I don't even think I could do it today. I don't think my body would handle it today.
No, no, I've never even done it before, and I can tell you my bones would not be able to participate. What was there anything that stuck with you or that you learned in those years that you were living on the street or homeless that
Uh,
you carry with you?
all kinds of stuff. I mean, seriously, all kinds of stuff. One of the things that really got me, that I learned first when traveling around, was that no matter where you go in the country, people might have a different accent, might have a different vocabulary, but like deep inside, we're all the same. And that really surprised me. Like, here I was growing up in the Midwest, and I went down to Alabama, and I realized these people have the same wants and desires that I do. And I think it's
Yes.
important to realize that, and even if they're not Americans, even if they're from some other country, we're all human beings. We all have the same wants and desires. We're not any different from each other, and I think that's important to remember.
Yeah, yeah. And I think also something that's interesting is a lot of what separates people is we all want the same thing. We just believe in a different method of getting there. Like maybe none of us want babies to starve on the street, but some of us think we can all, pay more taxes to keep this from happening. And other people think, no, here's a different method to keep that from happening. When the end result is like, okay, so we all agree on this one thing, or we all agree that being homeless is bad, or we all agree, yada, yada, yada. I think it's just the methodology with how people decide they're going to believe the best course of action to get away from that scenario is where we really differ, or where we find that we're just like, I can't agree with you on that. When you started doing the ACA shows, when you started being more outspoken, did that change any of your relationship dynamics in your life, or were they pretty much untouched or unscathed?
Yeah, pretty much unscathed. I live in a very isolated part of the country. I live in a very small town in an area where there just isn't a lot of people. I only have a couple of friends that live near me, so everybody I know is pretty far away from me. So it really didn't mess with, and the people who I do know here that I'm really close to. I can't say I was really good friends with a right-wing evangelical. We bonded over rocks and fishing, and we are no longer friends. And that was a long process. It took 3 or 4 years. I really tried to be his friend, but I just couldn't do it anymore. So
And was he wasn't a young earther, was he?
yeah, actually he is.
That's so interesting to be passionate
Bible.
about rocks and also not
Hmm.
believe they're as old as they are.
He was a Bible literalist too. That he
Wow.
believed, like, he totally believed Noah's Ark was real. And that's when I
Wow.
realized that if somebody is like so full of deep faith that there's no talking to him at all. Because I brought it. Well, we were talking about Noah's Ark, and I was like, well, how did the kangaroos get all the way from Australia to the Middle East and back? And he just went, God teleported them. Duh.
The Bible doesn't even say that.
Yeah, but that's
Yeah.
anything's possible if you have faith and you believe in magic, you believe in miracles, and
Interesting.
you can't argue it. You just simply can't argue with that. There's no way to.
What I find interesting is my friend Dr. Jack Wathy. He's been on this show before. He's a neuroscientist, but he also studies cults, and he told me that it's the little things, the tiniest things that often snap people out of it. You can tell somebody, here's a big giant example of how the Bible is not true. Here's another example of how this couldn't possibly line up. Here's another, discrepancy between the New and Old Testament, and they'll ignore all of it. But one day they'll see a tiny insignificant detail, and they'll realize, if that insignificant detail isn't true, and I'm a literalist, then what else isn't true?
Hmm.
And it just unravels from there. One of my favorite examples of that story is, do you know Godless Granny on YouTube?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I love her story about how her son was like, how did they survive with all that methane fart on the ark? How did they breathe? And she was like, oh my gosh, he's right. How did they breathe? Because I guess they live near a pig farm, and
Hmm.
it's hard to breathe with the open air. How did they breathe on the boat? And that one question was enough to undo 50 years of evangelical biblical literalism. So it's fascinating to me to talk to people like we do on these shows, and to wonder if any of the little things they're told when they call in are the one little thread that starts to unravel all, like, the foundation of their belief. And that's not what I'm not there to try and deconvert them. I'm just there to answer their questions.
Hmm.
But I've always wondered if you and I make like an offhanded joke, and that one joke is enough to just unravel the foundation of somebody's lifelong beliefs.
We
And
can
if you're
only hope,
listening to
right?
this, and if you're listening to this and I did that to you, I'm sorry. I apologize. I'd make bad jokes. Interesting. And so how did your deconstruction from your faith impact how you parent, if at all? Did it change anything about the way you raise
You
your
know,
kids?
I've been asked that a lot about how I raise my kids, and I both my children are atheists. I did not put that upon them. We actually went to a couple of churches while they were children because they wanted to go check it out. My daughter went to Vacation Bible School. She wanted to check it out. So didn't like it, only went twice, never went back again. So I wanted to be open with my children. I never discussed it with them until they started going to school. Then it got brought up because the other kids would ask them about it. You know, what church do you go to or whatever, you know, kids would mention God to each other. And they came to me, well, hey, what about this God thing that the other kids are talking about? And I just sat and explained to them, you know, well, you know, people believe Jesus, blah, blah, blah. I was raised a Christian, so I got a pretty good idea of what's going on. And I just gave it to him from a very neutral stance, you know, and then I explained to him that I personally did not believe that. So, and then
they were like, wait, so we don't have to get up on Sunday if we don't believe?
yeah,
Okay,
right,
we're staying
yeah.
atheists. Yeah, it's either stay home on Sundays or go to church. Never mind, we're staying home. We're atheists. So how did you get involved in the ACA?
I had a heart attack.
What?
Yeah, I had a heart attack. I have throughout most of my adult life, I have done some type of activism in one way or another. And I took a break. I was building this up so to leave it to my kids. And I took a break from activism for about 10 years. And then I had a heart attack and I decided I needed to get back doing things to give my life a little bit more meaning. And I was looking for something to do. I was watching AXP and they were looking for volunteers, or they mentioned that they were always looking for volunteers at recovering from religion. So I volunteered for that. I worked on the helpline for about 3 months.
Wow.
I had a really hard time because I'm very empathetic. So I was, you know, I talked to these people who were in just really bad emotional and psychological states. And it was really weird on me. I hate to say it. So I had to stop doing it. But I got involved with the atheist community of Discord and started doing a lot of stuff over there. I started a feature called Meet the ACA, where we get somebody from the ACA to come over and hang out for an hour or so once a week and just talk and meet the fans. So I started doing that. And then after about a year or so, they asked me to come on and do an episode of Nonprofits. And then they just kept, for some reason, they kept letting me come back and do it. So
they're like, this Kelley guy, he's nuts, but they like him, so we'll bring him back.
So yeah, so for some reason they made, actually what really surprised me when they asked me to be one of the regular hosts of Truth Wanted. So
yeah, and that's a great show. I'm going to link all of these in the description for anybody listening or watching this episode. You'll be able to find links to all of these shows and ACA channels in the description. So please check those out. I mean, shameless plug. I'm a little biased, but I think they're great shows. I think they're awesome shows, especially with Objectively Dan and Kelley and those guys over at Truth Wanted. Has there ever been a question you were asked during any of these shows that had you stumped, where you were like, that's a really good question?
I've had some really good questions. I don't think I've ever actually had anything stump me. You know, I mean, there are some things you get the precepts and there's no answer you can give them that they're going to accept anyway. Right.
Yeah. That's totally different. Yeah.
So, but no, I don't think anything, if nothing else, you could always look at a question, even if you don't understand all the parameters of it, there's usually some kind of logical angle you can look at it from. Right.
Yeah.
And at least talk about that, or at least, if nothing else, you know, steer the person away from that exact question and ask them about what their reactions to that question is. What are their feelings about that? I often say, I don't care about arguing about whether God is real or not.
Right.
I really don't. It doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
It's a argument that's been going on for centuries. Nobody's going to win it. But what I want to know is, why should I believe in your God? What is it going to do for me? What if I believe in your God? What am I going to have that everybody else doesn't have? So I like to bring it back to that. So if nothing else,
Yeah.
we can always steer the conversation back to where I want it to go.
And one thing I love about those shows is that I feel like people need to see more often people like us asking the callers, now what exactly are you asking? Or in your own words, explain what you mean, or explain it to me like I'm 5. Give me, because there's this, what's the word I'm looking for? There's this, I don't want to say trope, for lack of a better word, stereotype maybe, that in order to be on shows like that, you have to know your philosophers, you have to know your theories, you have to know your history, you have to know this and this. And I'm a redneck who just knows I don't believe in God and I ain't never seen proof, right? I don't, like, so and so could have said whatever they said in 1831, and all I know is that I ain't seen shit that proves shit to me. That's what I got, right? But
Right.
I like being able to ask them, in your own words, explain this theory to me, because I would like to talk through it for the first time with you. This is the first time I'm hearing this. And I think it breaks down this idea that you have to be ready on the defense with answers and correct and aggressive all the time, as opposed to, I've never heard of this before. Enlighten me. Tell me what it is that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great approach too. That's actually that's what I try to do, because I often find when people have to start explaining it, they often can't.
Yes.
So
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
and that might be that little, with that thing that you were talking about before, that little thing, that I
Yep.
believe in all of this, and I can't explain why I believe in this. That might be that little thing that maybe clicks in their head.
Yeah,
So yeah, I
yes.
think it's really important to ask those questions.
Right.
And to hold
Absolutely.
them to them. That's one of the things, because a lot of the callers will try to weasel out of answer, and you got to hold them to answering those questions, which is
Yes.
often hard, because you want to be nice,
Yes.
but you want to be firm as well, and it's kind of like walking a fine line.
Yes. And another thing that I have found helps a lot, and when I say helps, I genuinely mean helps the conversation. I don't mean gotcha or helps me win or whatever, is when they come on and they've got this script and they're reading this script a mile a minute because somewhere someone told people that being a good debater means you just talk faster than everybody else. And then you say, okay, so what I'm hearing is you're saying, and you say back to them exactly what they just said. Because I've noticed one of two things happens. Either, and I always say, correct me if I'm wrong. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. They'll either say something totally different than what they were saying because they hear back what they just said and they're like, ooh, that sounds crazy. No, 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 that's not what I said. I said this. They totally segue in a different direction. Or, like you said, they go, yeah, yeah, yeah. And you go, okay, great. In your own words, what does that mean? And then they can't necessarily explain it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not about winning. It's not about being like, haha, dumbass or whatever. It's about saying, think about how this feels for a second. Think about this moment where you're like, I don't actually know what I'm preaching in the literal and figurative sense. And take that with you and think about it. Because that's intense. If I realized in a moment on a live call-in show that my whole life was based on something I couldn't even explain, I would have an existential crisis. And so what I like that we're segueing away from the angry, hollering atheist, thing that used to be more popular back in the early aughts, and we're segueing more into, let's have a conversation. I want you to take this with you. And, we always say, please call back, think about this for a week or two. Next time we have this show, please call back. We'd love to hear what you discovered about this in this amount of time. And open the floor for real conversation.
Mm-hmm. We all, as the host, we often say that we're having these conversations not for the person that we're talking to, but for the audience who's listening, right? And I think when we come off as the logical one, as the one who isn't getting overly excited, that's trying to be more understanding, I think that looks really good for us.
Yeah.
I think it helps us make our point a lot better. However, because of those angry people in that started 10, 20 years ago, there's still this stereotypical straw man that a lot of atheists think that they're going to encounter when they talk to one of us. So they come out in a defensive mode right away.
Guns blazing, blasting.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Guns blazing. So it's oftentimes hard to disarm those people.
It is.
But I think it's important that we learn better ways to do that because, like I said, I think it's more effective to get them thinking about things instead of just yelling at each other.
Yes, yes. I think they are told that they're not going to get a chance to talk, that we're going to yell and holler and scream, that we're going to call them names, and that we're going to hang up on them or we're going to mute them. And when we don't do any of those things, it throws them off entirely, and they don't actually know that. Then they just repeat themselves over and over and over again because that's all they came with, because they didn't think they were going to get to talk for more than 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And I love doing that. I love that moment.
You're cruel.
Kill them with kindness. Do you have any close friends anymore that are still religious people, or do you think you've mostly segued into non-religious friends?
Yeah, I think I didn't really have a whole lot of religious friends to begin with. So
yeah.
I still have a lot of wooey friends. I got to say that. I still have a lot of people who believe in woo. But mostly, like, not too many Christians. That I had the one friend that was, I just had to break it off with him. I couldn't take it anymore. But yeah, it was the idea. He just had this idea that we all have our separate truths, and I was like, no, we don't have separate truths. The truth is the same for everybody, you know. And he's just
right.
But to him, I have my truth, you have your truth, and we just and I just couldn't take it anymore because he was, not only that, but he was just spamming me with Christian stuff, and I kept asking him to stop, you know, and he just wouldn't stop.
Right. Well, and it's interesting you say that, because I've heard that before too, where people are like, oh, we all have our own truth, and yet if it's not their truth, it's not true. Like they can't.
Yeah, right.
It's like,
right.
Wait, so if we all have our separate truth, then what is the point of the Bible? Well, the Bible is the way, the truth, and that. No, well, you just said we all have our. Why are we not born with our own Bibles then? You got to pick one.
Yeah, you're talking about those little things that break this, you know, the word, that straw, right? We got into it because I told them birds were smarter than dogs.
They are.
I know they are, but he refuses to believe that, and he has his own truth. Dogs are smarter than birds, and that was what that finally clicked for me. I was like, no, that's just not true. You can't have that as a truth because it's not true. Well, and he just refused to go look it up. So,
and to be fair, we've got one, and I can't say with my full chest that Queenie is smarter than many other creatures on this earth. We love her, but she's not exactly smart. So maybe not all birds are smarter.
No. I mean,
Queenie's kind of dumb, but she tries. She tries really hard.
Doves. I mean, if you ever met a dove, doves are pretty stupid. So.
Yeah, I did a lot of research recently on the intelligence of vultures, and now they're one of my favorite animals. Cool. But I'm saying all of this hoping my dog can't hear me. You're brilliant. You're beautiful. So if somebody's watching this and they really want to get involved in atheist activism or agnostic activism, or somehow they just want to get involved in things like the ACA or any kind of internet activism, they're ready to take that step, what would you recommend they do? Where would you recommend they go?
Dive in. You can always volunteer at the ACA. They're always looking for people over there. You can go to the atheist community of Discord. There's a really good community there. Even if there's a lot of ACA hosts started out doing features over there, doing things like me on Meet the ACA. They have a news chat that they do once a week. They have another thing called Speak Your Truth, where they get somebody talking about something they know a lot about. You can answer you can ask them questions and stuff. So there's like features over there. If you don't know what you're doing, you've never done anything like this before, it's a good way to get started. Like that's where I got started at. And I'm thinking a lot of the people in the nonprofits, Helen Green started over there, Jason Friedman, John Rodovich. So we've got quite a few people that have come out of there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I would recommend doing something like that. You can always just start your own channel. I mean, there's nothing wrong with starting your own channel.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if you get 10 views in a week. Keep up with it. Keep up with it, because eventually people are going to notice that you're there. Right?
That's what I did. I literally just started my own channel. I was like, who are the people who I feel like would never, ever respond to my emails? I'll ask them first. They responded. They were guests on the show. And then it just kind of went from there. Yeah, I second that entirely. Well,
Yeah.
Kelley, this has been a really fantastic conversation. I've really enjoyed getting to know more about your past, because we've alluded to it here and there, but I've never really gotten a chance to sit down and talk to you about your story. And I think it's really fantastic. And I almost feel like your story could really just be its own podcast. You could just have a series of, the beginning years, the middle years, the end years. But I also really appreciate that. I feel like you're a perfect example of somebody who has been through so much, and yet you're still out here helping other people, dedicating your time for free to causes that matter a lot to you, and just being a positive person. Like, you're just a lot of fun.
I'm a selfish altruist, right? I go out and I do good things because it makes the world a better place for me.
Absolutely.
Right? So
absolutely. You're like, listen, I do it because it makes it better for me. I'm glad it makes it better for all of you too. But yeah. And you do it with great ties.
Yes, I do. Thank you.
That's the most
much.
important part. For anybody listening, this dinosaur tie, you should watch the YouTube version. This dinosaur tie is immaculate. Well, Kelley.
I love my dinosaurs too.
Yeah. Especially I was about to make a young Earth creationist joke, but I won't. Never mind. We love dinosaurs. We love all dinosaurs. Well, Kelley, this has been phenomenal. Anybody listening, down in the comments of where you're watching or listening, any platform, you'll be able to find links to the different ACA shows. You'll be able to find Talk Heathen, Atheist Experience, Truth Wanted, Nonprofits. You'll be able to find Atheist Community of Discord. I'll link some of the Discords that have public links in the comments. Feel free to check them out, and email me if you have any questions for Kelley, or if you want to tell me what you thought about this episode. You can send me an email, or you can comment if you're watching this on YouTube, and I'd love to send Kelley your thoughts. I was about to say your thoughts and prayers. Not your prayers, just your thoughts.